Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashta Prayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtiki. Reading from chapter 16 of the 10th canto, Krishna chastises the serpent Kaliya. Chapter summary. This chapter describes Lord Sri Krishna's pastime of subduing the serpent Kaliya within the lake adjoining the river Yamuna, and his showing mercy to Kaliya in response to the prayers offered by Kaliya's wives, the Nagapatnis. To restore the purity of the Yamuna's waters, which had been contaminated by Kaliya's poison, Lord Krishna climbed into a kadamba tree on the river bank and jumped into the water. Then he began fearlessly playing with the water like a maddened elephant. Kaliya could not tolerate Krishna's trespassing upon his personal residence, and the serpent quickly went up to the Lord and bit him on the chest. When Krishna's friends saw this, they fell down on the ground unconscious. At that time, all sorts of evil omens appeared in Braj, such as earth tremors, falling stars, and the trembling of various creatures' left limbs. The residents of Vrindavan thought, "Today Krishna went to the forest without Balaram, so we do not know what great misfortune may have befallen him." Thinking in this way, they traced the path of Krishna's footprints to the bank of the Yamuna. Within the water of the lake, adjoining the river, they saw Lord Krishna, the very essence of their lives. Enwrapped in the coils of a black snake, the residents thought the three worlds had become empty, and they all prepared to enter the water. But Lord Balaram checked them, knowing well the power of Krishna. Then Lord Krishna, seeing how disturbed his friends and relatives had become, expanded his body greatly and forced the serpent to loosen his grip and release him. Next, the Lord began playfully dancing about on the serpent's hoods. But this wonderful, boisterous dancing, Sri Krishna trampled the serpent's 1,000 hoods until the body slackened, vomiting blood from his mouth. Kaliya finally understood that Krishna was the primeval personality, Lord Narayan, the spiritual master of all moving and non-moving creatures, and he took shelter of him. Seeing how very wary Kaliya had become, his wives, the Nagapatnis, bowed down at Krishna's lotus feet. Then they offered him various prayers in hopes of gaining their husband's freedom. "It's quite fitting that you have brought our cruel husband to this condition. Indeed, by your anger he has gained great benefit. What piety Kaliya must have amassed in his previous lives. Today he has borne upon his head the dust of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the attainment of which was difficult for even the mother of the universe, Goddess Lakshmi. Please kindly forgive the offense Kaliya has committed out of ignorance and allow him to live." Satisfied by the Nagapatni's prayers, Krishna released Kaliya, who slowly gained his sensory and vital powers. Then Kaliya, in a distressed voice, acknowledged the offense he had committed, and finally he offered Krishna many prayers and said that he was ready to accept his command. Krishna told him to leave the Yamuna lake with his family and return to Ramanaka Island. Shri Shukha Vacha Vilokya Dushtitam Krishnam Krishna Krishna Hina Vibho Tasya Vishuddhim Anvichan Sarpam Tam Udavasayat. Shukadeva Goswami said, Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, seeing that the Yamuna river had been contaminated by the black snake Kaliya, desired to purify the river, and thus the Lord banished him from it. Shri Raja Vacha Katamantar Jale Gadhe Nyagrinad Bhagavanahim Savai Bahu Yuga Vasam Yathasid Vipra Katyatam. King Parikshit inquired, O learned sage, please explain how the Supreme Personality of Godhead chastised the serpent Kaliya within the unfathomable waters of Yamuna, and how it was that Kaliya had been living there for so many ages. Brahman Bhagavatastasya Bhumna Swachhanda Vartina Gopalodara Charitam Kastripyetatmritam Jushan. A Brahmana, the unlimited Supreme Personality of Godhead, freely acts according to his own desires. Who could be satiated when hearing the nectar of the magnanimous pastimes he performed as a cowherd boy in Vrindavan? Shri Shukha Vacha Kalindyam Kalya Syasid Hrada Kaschid Vishagnina Sar Pyamana yasmin patantyupari kagha. Sri Shukadeva Goswami said, within the river Kalindi, Yamuna, was a lake inhabited by the serpent Kaliya, whose fiery poison was constantly heated and boiled its waters. Indeed, the vapors thus created were so poisonous that the birds flying over the contaminated lake would fall down into it. In this regard, the Acharyas explained that Kaliya lake was situated apart from the main current of the river. Otherwise, the Yamuna's waters could have been poisonous even in cities like Mathura and in other places farther away. Viprushmata vishadormi marutena bhimarshita mriyante tiragayasya pranina stira jangama. The wind blowing over the deadly lake carried droplets of water to the shore. Simply by coming in contact with the poisonous breeze, all vegetation and creatures on the shore died. The word stira, unmoving creatures, referred to various types of vegetation, including trees, and jangama refers to moving creatures, such as animals, reptiles, birds, and insects. Srila Sridhar Swami has quoted a further description in the lake from the Harivamsha. Dirgam yojana vastaram dustaram tridashairapair gambhiram akshobhyam jalam nishkampam iva sagaram dukho pasarpam tireshu sasarpair vipulair vilay visharani bhavasyangnair dhumena pariveshtitam trineshvapi patat swapshu jvalantam iva tejasa samantad yojanam sagram tireshvapi durasadam. The lake was quite wide, 8 miles across at some point, and even the demigods could not cross over it. The water in the lake was very deep, and like the immovable depths of the ocean, could not be agitated. Approaching the lake was difficult, for its shores were covered with holes in which serpents lived. All around the lake was a fog generated by the fire of the serpent's poison. This powerful fire would at once burn up every blade of grass that happened to fall into the water for a distance of 8 miles from the lake. The atmosphere was most unpleasant. Srila Sanatana Goswami states that by the mystical science of Jalastambhana, making solid items out of water, Kaliya had built his own city within the lake. Tam chandavega vishaviryam avykshyatena dushtam nadim cha khalasamyamana vatara Krishna kadambam adhiruhya tatoti tungam asho tyagada gadha rashano nyapatad vishode. Lord Krishna saw how the Kaliya serpent had polluted the Yamuna river with his terribly powerful poison. Since Krishna had descended from the spiritual world specifically to subdue envious demons, the Lord immediately climbed to the top of a very high kadamba tree and prepared himself for battle. He tightened his belt, slapped his arms, and then jumped into the poisonous water. According to the Acharyas, Lord Krishna also tied back the locks of his hair as he prepared to do battle with Kaliya. Sarpa Hrida Purushas Saranipata Vega Samshobhito Raga Vichoshvasitam Bhurasi Paryaklito Vishakasaya Bibhi Shanor Nir Dhavan Dhanu Shatamananta Balasya Kim Tat. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the serpent's lake, the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of the Lord's entrance in the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous fearsome waves flooded the surrounding lands up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. It is not at all amazing, however, for the Supreme Lord possesses infinite strength. Tasya hrade viharato bhujadanda gurna vargosha mangavara varna vikramasya ashrutya tatsvat sadanabhi bhavam nirikshya chakshushravasamasarattadamrishyamana. Krishna began sporting in Kaliya's lake like a lordly elephant, swirling his mighty arms and making the water resound in various ways. When Kaliya heard these sounds, he understood that someone was trespassing in his lake. The serpent could not tolerate this and immediately came forward. According to the Acharyas, Lord Krishna was producing wonderful musical sounds within the water simply by splashing his hands and arms. Tam prekshaniya sukumara ghanavadatam Srivatsapita vasanam smita sundarasyam Kridantam apratibhyam kamalodharangrim Sandhasya marmasu rushabhujaya chachada. Kaliya saw that Sri Krishna, who wore yellow silken garments, was very delicate, his attractive body shining like a glowing white cloud, his chest bearing the mark of Srivatsa, his face smiling beautifully, and his feet resembling the whorl of a lotus flower. The Lord was playing fearlessly in the water. Despite his wonderful appearance, the envious Kaliya furiously bit him on the chest and then completely enwrapped him in his coils. Tam naga bhoga parivitam adrishta cheshtam Alokya tat priyasakha pashupabhrishartha Krishner pitatma suhridartha kalatra kama Dukkhanushoka bhayamuradiyo nipetu. When the members of the coward community who had accepted Krishna as a dearmost friend saw him enveloped in the snake's coils, motionless, they were greatly disturbed. They had offered Krishna everything, their very selves, their families, their wealth, wives, and all pleasures. At the sight of the Lord in the clutches of Kaliya's snake, their intelligence became deranged by grief, lamentation, and fear, and thus they fell to the ground. Sri Sanatana Goswami explained that the coward boys, along with some coward men and farmers who had happened to be in the vicinity, who were also devotees of Krishna, fell to the ground just like trees that had been cut at the root. Gava vrisha vatsataraya krandamana suddukita Krishne nyastekshana bhita rudantya ivatastire. The cows, bulls, and female calves, in great distress, called out piteously to Krishna. Fixing their eyes on him, they stood still in fear, as if ready to cry, but too shocked to shed tears. Atavraje mahotpatas trividha hyati daruna Utpetur bhuvidivyat manya asanna bhaya samshina. In the Vrindavan area, there then rose all three types of fearful omens, those on the earth, those in the sky, those in the bodies of the living creatures, which announced imminent danger. According to Srila Sridhar Swami, the omens were as follows. On the earth, there were disturbing tremors. In the sky, there were meteors falling, and in the bodies of the creatures, there was shivering, as well as quivering of the left eye and other parts of the body. These omens announced imminent danger. Tan alaksha bhayodvigna gopananda purogama vinaram ramena ga krishnam nyatva charitum katam terdurnimitair nidhanam matva praptam atha vida tat pranastan manas kaste dukkha shoka bhayatura abala vriddha vanita sarvenga pashu vrittaya nirjagmur gokula dina krishna darshana lalasa. Seeing the inauspicious omens, Nanda Maharaj and the other coward men were fearful, for they knew that Krishna had gone to herd the cows that day without his elder brother Balaram, because they had dedicated their minds to Krishna, accepting him as their very life. They were unaware of his great power and opulence. Thus they concluded that the inauspicious omens indicated he had met with death, and they were overwhelmed with grief, lamentation, and fear. All the inhabitants of Vrindavan, including the children, women, and elderly persons, thought of Krishna just as a cow thinks of her helpless young calf. And these poor, suffering people rushed out of the village, intent upon finding him. Tamsata kataran vikshya Bhagavan Madhavo Vala Prahasya Kinchino Vacha Prabhavagno Nujasya Sa. The Supreme Lord Balaram, the master of all transcendental knowledge, smiled and said nothing when he saw the residents of Vrindavan in such distress, since he understood the extraordinary power of his younger brother. Sri Balaram, in his plenary expansion of Lord Krishna, and is thus non-different from him. They are, in fact, the same absolute manifest in separate forms. According to Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, Lord Balaram was laughing because he thought Krishna never cares to play with me in the form of Sheshanag, but now he is playing with this ordinary mundane snake named Kaliya. The question may arise as to why Krishna and Balaram allowed their loving devotees to suffer such great anguish during Krishna's temporary imprisonment within the clouds of Kaliya. It must be remembered that because the inhabitants of Vrindavan were completely liberated souls, they did not experience material emotions. When they saw their beloved Krishna in apparent danger, their love for him intensified to the highest degree, and thus they merged completely into the ecstasy of love for him. The whole situation has to be seen from the spiritual point of view, or it will not be seen at all. Te nimishe manadaitam Krishnam suchitaya pade Bhagaval Lakshanayar Jagmu Padavya Yamuna Tatam. The residents hurried toward the banks of the Yamuna in search of the dearmost Krishna, following the paths marked by his footprints, which bore the unique signs of the personality of Godhead. Te tetra tatrabja yavan kushashani dvajo papanani padani vishpate marge gavamanya padantarantare nirikshamana yayuranga satvara. The footprints of the Lord, the master of the entire cowherd community, were marked with the lotus flower, barley corn, elephant, goad, thunderbolt, and flag. My dear Parikshit, King Parikshit, seeing his footprints on the path among the cow hoofprints, the residents of Vrindavan rushed along in great haste. Srila Sanatana Goswami comments as follows: since Lord Krishna had passed along the path some time previously, why weren't his footprints, which were surrounded by those of cows, cowherd boys, and so on, smudged over and brushed away? Why hadn't his footprints been obliterated by those of the beasts and birds of Vrindavan's forest? The answer is indicated by the word Vishpati, master of the cowherd community. Since Lord Krishna is actually the wealth of all living beings, all the inhabitants of the forest of Raj would carefully preserve his footprints as great treasures, the very ornaments of the earth. Thus no creature within Vrindavan would ever walk upon Lord Krishna's footprints. Antar Rade Bhujaga Bhoga Paritamara Krishnam Niriham Upalabhya Jala Shayante Gopamsha Muda Dishanan Parita Pashumscha Sankrandata Paramakashmalam Apurartha. As they hurried along the path of the bank of the Yamuna river, they saw from a distance that Krishna was in the lake motionless, with the cowherd boys motionless within the claws of the black serpent. They further saw that the cowherd boys had fallen unconscious and that the animals were standing on all sides, crying out for Krishna. Seeing all this, the residents of Vrindavan were overwhelmed with anguish and confusion. In their grief and panic, the residents of Vrindavan tried to find out whether Kaliya had forcibly dragged young Krishna from the shore into the water, or whether Krishna had himself jumped from the shore and fallen into the clutches of the snake. They could not understand anything about the situation, and Krishna's cowherd boyfriends, being unconscious, were unable to tell them anything. The cows and calves were crying out for Krishna, and thus the whole situation was overwhelming and created a state of shock and panic among the residents of Vrindavan. Gopyo nurakta manaso bhagavantyanante tad saurhridar smita vilokya gira smarantya grastehina priyatame brisha dukkha tapta shunyam priya vyatihritam dadrushu trilokam. When the young gopis, whose minds were constantly attached to Krishna, the unlimited Supreme Lord, so that he was now within the grips of the serpent, they remembered his loving friendship, his smiling glances, and his talks with them. Burning with great sorrow, they saw the entire universe as void. Ta Krishna mataram apatyam anupravishtham tulya vyatha samanugrahya sucha shravantya tastavraja priya katha kathayantas asan Krishnan nanirpita drisho mritaka pratika. Although the other gopis were feeling just as much distress and were pouring forth a flood of sorrowful tears, they had to forcibly hold back Krishna's mother, whose consciousness was totally absorbed in her son. Standing like corpses with their eyes fixed upon his face, These gopis each took turns recounting the pastimes of the darling of Braja. Krishna pranan nirvishato nandadin vikshatam hridam pratyashedhat sa bhagavan Rama Krishnanubhavavit. Lord Balaram then saw that Nanda Maharaj and the other cowherd men who had dedicated their very lives to Krishna were beginning to enter the serpent's lake. As the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Balaram fully knew of Lord Krishna's actual power and therefore he restrained them. Sri Sanatana Goswami explained that Lord Balaram checked some of the cowherd men by speaking to them, others by physically holding them, and still others by casting upon them his potent smiling glance. Distraught over the situation, they were prepared to give up their lives for Lord Krishna by entering the serpent's lake. Ithamsa gokulam ananya gatim niriksha sastri kumaramati dukhitam atma heto ajnaya martya padavim anuvartamana stitva muhurtamudatishta duranga bandhat. The Lord remained for some time within the coils of the serpent, imitating the behavior of an ordinary mortal. But when he understood that the women, children, and other residents of the village of Gokul were in acute distress because of their love for him, their only shelter and goal in life, he immediately rose up from the bonds of the Kaliya serpent. Tat pratyamana vapusha vyatitatma bhogas tyaktvonmaya kupitasva phanan bhujanga tastava swasan shvasanarandra vishambarisha Stabdhekshanol mukha mukho harimikshamana. His cause, tormented by the expanding body of the Lord, Kaliya released him. In great anger, the serpent then raised his hoods high and stood still, breathing heavily. His nostrils appeared like vessels for cooking poison, the staring eyes in his face like firebrands. Thus the serpent looked at the Lord. Tamje vayadvi shikhaya parileli Hanam dvesrikwani hyatikarala vishagni drishtim kridan amum pari sasara yatha khagendro babhrama sopyavasaram aprasamikshamana. Again and again, Kaliya licked his lips with his bifurcated tongues, and he stared at Krishna with a glance full of terrible poisonous fire. But Krishna playfully circled around him, just as Garuda would play with a snake. In response, Kaliya also moved about looking for an opportunity to bite the Lord. Krishna moved around the serpent so skillfully that Kaliya could find no opportunity to bite him. Thus the snake was defeated by Krishna's transcendental agility. Evam paribhramahatau jasam unnatam anamyatad pritushirasvadirudha adya tanmurdaratna nikara sparshati tamra padambujokhila khaladi gurur nanarta. Having severely depleted the serpent's strength with his relentless circling, Sri Krishna, the origin of everything, pushed down Kaliya's raised shoulders and mounted his broad serpentine heads. Thus Lord Sri Krishna, the original master of all fine arts, began to dance, his lotus feet deeply reddened by the touch of the numerous jewels upon the serpents' heads. Sri Harivamsa states, Shirasa Krishna Jagraha Swahastane Nava Namya. Krishna grabbed Kaliya's head with his hand and forced it to bow down. Most people in the world are quite reluctant to bow down to the Supreme Person, the Absolute Truth. In the contaminated state called material consciousness, we conditioned souls become proud of our insignificant position and thus reluctant to bow our heads before the Lord. Yet just as Lord Krishna forcefully pushed Kaliya's head down and thus defeated him, the Supreme Lord's energy in the form of irresistible time kills all conditioned souls and thus forces them to bow down their arrogant heads. We should therefore give up the artificial position of material life and become faithful servants of the Supreme Lord, enthusiastically bowing down at His lotus feet. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Lord Krishna's lotus feet became red like copper because of their contact with their numerous hard jewels upon the heads of Kaliya. Lord Krishna, with those glowing reddish feet, began to demonstrate his artistic skill by dancing on the unsteady, moving surface of the serpent's hoods. This extraordinary demonstration of dancing skill was meant for the pleasure of the young women of Vrindavan, who at the phase of their relationship with Krishna were seriously falling in love with him. Tam nartam udyatam avikshita datadiya gandharva siddha muni charana deva vadva pritya mridanga panavangaka vadya gita pushpopaharanuti sahosopadeshu. Seeing the Lord dancing his servants in the heavenly planets, the Gandharva, Siddha, sages, Charanas, and the wives of the demigods immediately arrived there. With great pleasure, they began accompanying the Lord's dancing by playing drums such as the mridangas, parnavas, and the anakas. They also made offerings of songs, flowers, and prayers. When the demigods and other residents of higher planetary system became aware that Lord Sri Krishna was personally putting on a wonderful demonstration of the art of dancing, they immediately came to offer their services. Dancing becomes more enjoyable and beautiful to watch when it is accompanied by expert drum playing, singing, and the chanting of prayers. The artistic atmosphere was enhanced by the showering of multitude flowers upon Lord Sri Krishna, who was blissfully engaged in dancing upon the hoods of the Kaliya serpent. Yachachiro namate gasataila shirshnas tattan mamarda karadanda dharongri pathay Kshinayusho brahmata ulbanam ashyato shrin nashto vaman parama kashmalam apanaga. My dear King, Kaliya, who had 101 prominent heads, and when one of them would not bow down, Sri Krishna, who inflicts punishment on cruel wrongdoers, would smash that stubborn head by striking it with his feet. Then as Kaliya entered his death throes, he began wheeling his head around and vomiting ghastly blood from his mouth and nostrils. The serpent thus experienced extreme pain and misery. Tasyak shibir garalamudvamata shirasu yat tat samun namatin swasatoru shokchay nrityan padanuna mayan damayan bhabhuva pushpay prapujita iveha puman purana. Extruding poisonous waste from his eyes, Kaliya would occasionally dare to raise one of his heads, which would breathe heavily with anger. Then the Lord would dance on it and subdue it, forcing it to bow down with his foot. The demigods took each of these exhibitions as an opportunity to worship him, the primeval personality of Godhead, with showering of flowers. Tachitra Tandava Vinugna Fana Rahastro Rakta Mukhair Uruvamana Nripa Bhagna Gatra Smitvachara Gurum Purusham Puranam Narayanam Tamaranam Manasa Jagama. My dear King Parikshit, Lord Krishna's wonderful, powerful dancing trampled and broke all of Kaliya's 1,000 hoods. Then the serpent, profusely vomiting blood from his mouth, finally recognized Sri Krishna to be the eternal personality of Godhead, the supreme master of all moving and non-moving beings. Sri Narayan, thus, within his mind, Kaliya took shelter of the Lord. In chapter 16 of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada points out that whereas previously Kaliya was vomiting poison, now his poison was exhausted and he began to vomit blood. Thus he had been cleansed of the vile contamination within his heart, and that had manifested as a serpent's venom. The word smritva, remembering, is very significant here. The wives of Kaliya were actually serious devotees of Lord Krishna, and according to the acharyas, they had often tried to convince their husbands to surrender to him. Finally, finding himself in unbearable agony, Kaliya remembered his wife's advice and took shelter of the Lord. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Kaliya's arch rival had traditionally been Garuda, the carrier of Vishnu, but now Kaliya realized that he was fighting an opponent who was thousands of times stronger than Garuda. and who therefore could only be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus Kaliya took shelter of Lord Krishna. Krishnasya garva jagato tribharavasannam parshni prahara parirugna pana tapatram drishtva himadyam upaseduramushya patnya arthashlatad vasana bhushana kesha bandha. When Kaliya's wife saw how the serpent had become so fatigued from the excessive weight of Lord Krishna, who carries the entire universe in his abdomen, and how Kaliya's umbrella-like hoods had been shattered by the striking of Krishna's heels, they felt great distress. With their clothing ornaments and their hair scattered in disarray, they then watched the eternal personality of Godhead. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Kaliya's wife had been disgusted with their husband because of his demoniac activities. They had been thinking, if this atheist is killed by the punishment of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then let him be killed. We will become widows and engage in the worship of the Supreme Lord. But then the ladies noticed Kaliya's facial expression and other bodily features, and they understood that Kaliya had indeed taken shelter of the Lord within his mind. Seeing that was manifested symptoms of humility, remorse, regret, and doubt, they thought, just see how fortunate we are. Our husband has now become a Vaishnava. Therefore, we must now endeavor to protect him. They felt affection for their repentant husband and severe distress because of his miserable position, and thus all together they went into the presence of the Supreme Lord. Tam suvigna manasota puraksh kritarva kayam nidhaya bhuvi bhutab patim pranemu sadvaya kritanjali puta samalasya bhartur mokshepshava saranadam saranam prapanna. Their minds very much disturbed, those saintly ladies placed their children before them and then bowed down to the Lord of all creatures, laying their bodies flat upon the ground. They desired the liberation of their sinful husbands and the shelter of the Supreme Lord, the giver of ultimate shelter, and thus they folded their hands in supplication and approached him. Nagapatnya uchuhu Nyayo hidanda krita kilbishesmims tavavatara kalanigrahaya reposutanam apitulya drishtir daste damam phalamevanus shamsan. The wives of the Kaliya serpent said, the punishment this offender has been subjected to is certainly just. After all, you have incarnated within this world to curb down envious and cruel persons. You are so impartial that you look equally upon your enemies and your own sons. For when you impose a punishment on living beings, you know it to be for his ultimate benefit. Anugrohoyam bhavata krito hino dando satante khalu kalmasapaha Yadanda shukatvam amushya dehina krodopite nugraha eva sammata. What you have done here is actually mercy for us, since the punishment you give to the wicked certainly drives away all their contamination. Indeed, because of his conditioned soul, our husband is so sinful that he has assumed the body of a serpent. Your anger toward him is obviously to be understood as your mercy. Sri Madhvacharya points out in this connection that when a pious person suffers in this world, he realizes the punishment the Supreme Lord has met out to me is actually his causeless mercy. Envious persons, however, even after being punished by the Lord for their purification, continue to envy him and be resentful in this attitude, in the reason for their continued failure to understand the absolute truth. Tapa sutaptam kimanena purvam nirastamanena chamanadena dharmotava sarva jananukampaya yato bhavam stusyati sarva jiva. Did our husbands carefully perform austerities in our previous life with his mind free of pride and full of respect for others? Is that why you are pleased with him? Or did he in some previous existence carefully execute religious duties with compassion for all living beings? And is that why you, the life of all living beings, are now satisfied with him? In this regard, Srila Prabhupada comments in his Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, chapter 16, the Nagapatnis confirmed that one cannot come in contact with Krishna without having executed pious activities and devotional service in his previous lives. As Lord Chaitanya advised in his Shikshastika, one has to execute devotional service humbly, chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street, not expecting honor for himself, but offering all kinds of honor to others. The Nagapatnis were astonished that although Kaliya had the body of a serpent as a result of grievous sinful activities, at that same time he was in contact with the hoods to the extent that the Lord's lotus feet were touching his hoods. Certainly, this was not the ordinary results of pious activities. These two contradictory facts astonished them. Kasyanubhavasya na deva vidmahe tavangri renus parasadhikara yadvanchaya shrir lalanacharat tapo vihaya kaman suchiram dhrita vrita. O Lord, we do not know how the serpent Kaliya has attained this great opportunity of being touched by the dust of your lotus feet. For this end, the goddess of fortune performed austerities for centuries, giving up all other desires and taking austere vows. Nanaka prishtam nacha sarvabhaumam na parameshyam na dasadapatyam na yoga satyar apunar bhavam va vanchanti yat padaraja prapanna. Those who have attained the dust of your lotus feet never hanker for the kinship of heaven, limitless sovereignty, the position of Brahma, or rulership of the earth. They are not interested even in the perfections of yoga, or in liberation itself. Tadesha natapa duraptam anyay stamo jani krodavashopya isha samsara chakre brahmata sharirino yad ichhata shadvibhava samaksha. O Lord, although this Kaliya, the king of the serpents, has taken birth in the mode of ignorance and is controlled by anger, he has achieved that which is difficult for others to achieve. Embodied souls who are full of desires and are thus wandering in the cycle of birth and death can have all benedictions manifested before their eyes, simply by receiving the dust of your lotus feet. It is very rare for a conditioned soul to free himself from the contamination of illusion and thus become established in the perfect consciousness of absolute truth. And yet this benediction was achieved by the serpent Kaliya because the Lord personally danced upon the serpent's hood with his lotus feet. Although we conditioned souls may not receive the mercy of having the Lord dance on our head, we can receive the dust of the lotus feet of the absolute truth through the Lord's representative, the bona fide spiritual master, thus go back home, back to Godhead, forever freed from the mystery and ignorance of the mundane universe. Namastubhyam bhagavate purushaya mahatmane bhutavasaya bhutaya paraya paramatmane. We offer our obeisances unto you, the Supreme Personality Godhead, although present in our hearts of all living beings as a super soul. You are all pervasive. Although the original shelter of all created material elements, you exist prior to their creation, and although the cause of everything, you are transcendental to all material cause and effects, being the Supreme Soul. The beautiful Sanskrit poetry of this verse should be chanted out loud for the transcendental pleasure of the reciter and the hearer. Jnana Vijnana Nidhaye Brahmane Nanta Shaktaye Agunna Ya Vikaraya Namaste Prikritaya Cha. Obeisances unto you, the Absolute Truth, who are the reservoir of all transcendental consciousness and potency and the possessor of unlimited energies. Although completely free of material qualities and transformations, you are the prime mover of material nature. Those who consider themselves intellectual, the philosophic, or irrational should carefully note here that the Absolute Truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the ocean of all knowledge and consciousness. Thus, surrendering unto the Supreme Lord does not entail giving up the method of rationally comprehending reality. Rather, one merges into the ocean of rational logic comprehension. The Supreme Lord is the perfection of all sciences and all forms of knowledge, and only envious and trivial minds would deny this obvious fact. Kalaya kala nabhaya kala vayava sakshine vishvaya tad upadrashtre tad katre vishvahetave. Obeisances unto you who are time itself, the shelter of time, and the witness of time in all its phases. You are the universe and also its separate observer. You are its creator and also the totality of all its causes. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, although appearing in different incarnations, can never be limited by time, since He is time itself, the shelter of time, and the witness of time in all its phases. Bhuta matrendriya prana manobuddhya ashayatmane trigunena bhimanena gudasvatmanubhutaye namunantaya sukshmaya kutasthaya vipaschite nanavadanurudhaya vachavakshake vachakashaktaye. Obeisances unto you who are the ultimate soul of all of the physical elements of the subtle bases of perception, the senses, of the vital air of life, and of the mind, intelligence, and consciousness. By your arrangement, the infinitesimal spirit souls falsely identify with the three modes of material nature, and their perception of their own true self thus becomes clouded. We offer our obeisances unto you, the unlimited Supreme Lord, the supremely subtle one, the omniscient personality of Godhead, who are always fixed in unchanging transcendence, who sanctions the opposing views of different philosophies, and who are the power of upholding express ideas and the words that express Him. Nama pramana mulaya kavaye shastra yonaye pravrittaya nirvrittaya nigamaya namo namaha. We offer our obeisances again and again to you, who are the basis of all authoritative evidence, who are the author and the ultimate source of the revealed scriptures, and who have manifested yourself in those Vedic literatures, encouraging sense gratification, as well as in those encouraging renunciation of the material world. If we did not have the powers of perception and cognition, evidence could not be transmitted, and if we had no tendency to believe in particular modes of evidence, persuasion could not take place. All of these processes, perception, cognition, persuasion, and transmission, take place through the various potencies of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord Krishna is Himself the greatest scholar and intellectual being. He manifests the transcendental scriptures within the hearts of great devotees like Brahma and Narada, and in addition, He incarnates as Vyasadeva, the compiler of all Vedic knowledge. In multifarious ways, the Lord generates varieties of religious scriptures which gradually bring the conditioned souls through the various phases of re-entry into the kingdom of God. Nama Krishnaya Ramaya Vasudeva Sutaya Cha Pradyumnaya Aniruddhaya Sattvatam Pataye Namaha. We offer obeisances to Lord Krishna and Lord Ram, the sons of Vasudeva, and to Lord Pradyumna and Lord Aniruddha. We offer respectful obeisances unto the master of all the saintly devotees of Vishnu. Nama Guna Pradipaya Gunatma Chaddanaya Cha Gunavrityopalakshaya Gunadrashtresva Samvide. Obeisances to you, O Lord, who manifests varieties of material and spiritual qualities. You disguise yourself within the material qualities, and yet the functioning of those same material qualities ultimately reveals your existence. You stand apart from the material qualities as a witness and can be fully known only by your devotees. The word guna conveys various meanings. The three basic qualities of material nature, that is, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Excellent qualities one manifests because of piety and spiritual achievement. In the internal senses, such as the mind and intelligence, the word pradipaya means unto him who manifests or illumines. Thus here the Nagapatnis are addressing the Supreme Lord as He who manifests all material and spiritual qualities, and who causes the living entities to be conscious. One can see the Lord by going beyond the screen of material nature. Therefore He is called Gunatma Chaddanaya. If one methodically and intelligently studies the functioning of the material qualities, he will ultimately conclude that there is a supreme personality of Godhead and that he exhibits his illusory potency to bewilder those who do not surrender unto him. The Lord is never affected by the modes of nature, being their witness, and thus he is called Guna Drashtre. The word Swa indicates one's own, and thus Swa Samvide means that the Lord can be known by his own people, the devotees, and also the ultimate and also that ultimately only the Lord can know himself perfectly. Therefore, we should take Lord Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita and immediately come to the right conclusion, full surrender to the Lord's lotus feet. Thus, we should humbly glorify the Lord, following the example of Nagapatnis. Avyakritya viharaya sarva vyakritya siddhaye rishikesha namaste stu munaye mauna siline. O Lord Rishikesh, master of the senses, please let us offer our obeisances unto you, whose pastimes are inconceivably glorious. Your existence can be inferred from the necessity for a creator and a revealer of all cosmic manifestation. But although your devotees can understand you in this way, to the non-devotees you remain silent, absorbed in self-satisfaction. Paravara gati jnaya sarvadhyakshaya te namaha avishvaya cha vishvaya tadrastresya cha hetave. Obeisances unto you, who know the destination of all things superior and inferior, and who are the presiding regulator of all that be. You are distinct from the universal creation, and yet you are the basis upon which the illusion of material creation evolves, and also the witness of this illusion. Indeed, you are the root cause of the entire world. The word para and avara indicate superior, subtle elements, and inferior, gross ones. The words also indicate superior personalities, devotees of the Lord, and inferior personalities who are unaware of the glories of the Lord. Lord Krishna knows the destiny of all superior and inferior energies, animate and inanimate, and as the supreme truth, he remains in his unique position above everything as indicated by the word Sarva Dyakshaya. Swamihasya janmastiti samyaman vibho guner aniho krita kala shakti drik tat swabhava Bhavan pratibodhayan sata samikshaya mogha vihara ihase. O Almighty Lord, although you have no reason to become involved in material activities, still you act through your eternal potency of time to arrange for the creation and maintenance and destruction of the universe. You do this by awakening the distinct functions of each of the modes of nature, which before the creation lie dormant. Simply by a glance, you perfectly execute all these activities of cosmic control and you're in a sporting mood. Skeptics may question why the Supreme Lord has created the material world, which is full of birth, maintenance, and death. Here, the Nagapatnis point out that the Lord's pastimes are amoga, beyond any discrepancy. Sri Krishna actually desires that all conditioned souls live with him in his eternal kingdom. But those forgetful souls who are inimical to their loving relationship with God must go to the material world and be subjected to the conditions of time. The fortunate conditioned souls are startled into remembrance of their actual position as loving servants of the Lord. And from within the heart, the Lord then encourages them to come back home, back to Godhead, where time is conspicuous by its absence and where eternal, blissful existence supersedes the dramatic but disturbing functions of cosmic creation and annihilation. Tasyevate tanavastri lokyam shanta ashanta utamura yunaya shanta priyastehya adhunavitum satam sthatuschate dharma paripsayehata. Therefore, all material bodies throughout the three worlds, those that are at peace, those that are peaceful in the mode of goodness, those that are agitated in the mode of passion, those that are foolish in the mode of ignorance, all are your creations. Still, those living entities whose bodies are in the mode of goodness are especially dear to you. And it is to maintain them and protect their glorious principles that you are now present on the earth. Aparadha shakrit bhartra shodhavya swaprajakrita kshantumarhasi shantatman mudhasya tvam ajanata. At least once a master should tolerate an offense committed by his child or subject. O supreme peaceful soul, you should therefore forgive our foolish husband who did not understand who you are. Because of their extreme anxiety in this verse, Kaliya's wives mention the same idea twice, that the Supreme Lord should kindly forgive their foolish husband. The Supreme Lord is Shantatma, the supreme peaceful soul, and therefore the Nagapati suggests it would be proper for him to overlook at least this once, the great offense committed by the ignorant Kaliya. Anugrih Nishva Bhagavan Pranam Tyajati Pannaga Strinam Na Sadhu Sochanam Pati Prana Pradiyatam. O Supreme Lord, please be merciful. It is proper for the saintly to feel compassion for women like us. This serpent is about to give up his life. Please give us back our husband, who is our life and soul. Videhiti te kinkar karinam anushteyam tavagnaya yachradhayanutishtanvai muchate sarvato bhayat. Now please tell us, your maidservants, what we should do. Certainly anyone who faithfully executes your order is automatically freed from all fear. The surrender of Kaliya's wives was now complete, and Lord Krishna immediately gave them his mercy, as described in the following verses. Shri Shukha Vacha Itam Sanaga Patnivir Bhagavan Samabhishtuta Murchitam Bhagna Sirasam Visasar Jangri Kutanai. Shukadeva Goswami said, thus praised by the Nagapatnis, the Supreme Personality of Godhead released the serpent Kaliya, who had fallen unconscious, his head battered by the striking of the Lord's lotus feet. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Lord Krishna, upon reaching his decision, immediately jumped down from Kaliya's hoods and stood before the serpents and his wife. We should remember that when Lord Krishna executed these pastimes, he was just a young village boy in Vrindavan. Pratilabdhena Labdhendriya Prana Kaliya Shanakar Harim Kritrat Samuchvasandina Krishnam Praha Kritanjali. Kaliya slowly regained his vital force and sensory functions. Then, breathing loudly and painfully, the poor serpent addressed Lord Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, in humble submission. Kaliya Uvacha Vayam Kala Sohot Patya Tamasa Dirgha Man Yava Svabhavo Dushtyajo Natha Lokanam Yada Sadgraha. The serpent Kaliya said, our very birth as a snake has made us envious, ignorant, and constantly angry. O my Lord, it is so difficult for people to give up their conditioned nature by which they identify with that which is unreal. Srila Sanatana Goswami points out that because of his wretched condition, Kaliya was unable to compose original prayers to the Lord, and thus he paraphrased some of the prayers offered by his wife. The word asadgraha indicates that a conditioned soul seizes upon impermanent, impure things such as his body, the bodies of others, and other countless varieties of material sense objects. The ultimate results of such material attachments is frustration, disappointment, and anguish, as a fact that has now become crystal clear to the poor serpent Kaliya. Tvaya shrishtam idam vasvam datar guna visar janam nana swabhava viryojo yoni bija sayakriti. O Supreme Creator, it is you who generate this universe composed of the variegated arrangement of the material modes, and in the process you manifest various kinds of personalities and species, varieties of sensory and physical strength, and the varieties of mothers and fathers with variegated mentalities and forms. Commenting on this verse, Srila Madhvacharya has quoted the Narada Purana as follows. From Hiranyagarbha, Brahma comes from the second creation of this universe. But the universe is primarily created by Vishnu himself. Vishnu is thus the primary creator, and the four-headed Brahma is merely the secondary creator. Vayam cha tatra bhagavan sarpa jatyuru manyava katham tyajamastvan mayam dustyajam mohita swayam. Supreme Personality God, among all the species within your material creation, we serpents are by nature always enraged, being thus deluded by your illusory energy, which is very difficult to give up. How can we possibly give it up on our own? Kaliya is here indirectly begging for the Lord's mercy, realizing that on his own He can never become free from illusion and suffering. Only by surrendering to the Lord and obtaining His mercy can one be released from the painful condition of material life. Bhavan hi karanam tatra sarvagno jagadishvara anugraham nigraham va manyase tad videhina. O Lord, since you are the omniscient Lord of the universe, you are the actual cause of freedom from illusion. Please arrange for us whatever you consider proper, whether it be mercy or punishment. Shri Shukha Uvacha Iti Akarnya Vacha Praha Bhagavan Karya Manusha Natrasteham Tvaya Sarpa Samudram Yahi Machiram Svajnatya Patya Daradyo Gonrbir Bhujyate Nadi. Shukadeva Goswami said, after hearing Kaliya's words, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was acting the role of a human being, replied, O serpent, you may not remain here any longer. Go back to the ocean immediately, accompanied by a retinue of children, wives, and other relatives and friends. Let this river be enjoyed by the cows and humans. Ya etat samsmaren martyas tubhyam mad anushasanam kritayan ubhayo santhyur na yushman bhayam apnuyat. If mortal being attentively remembers my command to you to leave Vrindavan and go to the ocean and narrates this account at sunrise and sunset, he will never be afraid of you. Yosmin snatva mad akride devadim starpayet shalay upashyamam smaran archet sarva papai pramuchyate. If one bathes in this place of my pastimes and offers the water of this lake to the demigods and other worshipful personalities, or if one observes a fast duly worships and remembers me, he is sure to become free from all sinful reactions. According to the Acharyas, the Lord spoke this verse to make it clear to Kaliya that he could by no means remain in the Yamuna lake. Although the Lord had mercifully pardoned the serpent and ordered him to go to the ocean with all his associates, Kaliya should not even consider questing to remain in the lake, because it was now to become a holy place of spiritual pilgrims. Dvipam ramanakam hitva hradametam upashita yadbhayatsa suparnastvam nadyan matpada lanchitam. Out of fear of Garuda, you left Ramanaka island and came to take shelter of this lake. But because you are now marked with my footprints, Garuda will no longer try to eat you. Shri Rishi Uvacha Mukto Bhagavata Rajan Krishnen Nadbhuta Karmana Tam Pujayam Asamudam Nagapatnyascha Sadaram. Shukadeva Goswami continued, my dear king, having been released by Lord Krishna and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose activities are wonderful, Kaliya joined his wives in worshipping him with great joy and reverence. Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments as follows on this verse. The word Adbhuta Karmana indicates the Lord's wonderful activities of saving the residents of Vrindavan and Kaliya, saving Kaliya himself from Garuda, and bestowing grace upon the victims of violence and the committer of that violence. The word Krishnena by Krishna indicates that because Kaliya's wives were great devotees of the Lord and offered him loving affection, Krishna withdrew Karshanam, both Kaliya's offense against the Lord's devotee, Garuda, and that against the residents of Vrindavan who were very dear to him. Divyambarasran manivi parardhyar api bhushane divyagan dhanule paischa Mahatyotpala Malaya Pujayitva Jagannatham Prasadya Garuda Dvajam Tata Priyabhyanu Jnata Parikramya Bhivantyatam Sakalatra Suhratputro Divyam Abdir Jagamaha Tataiva Smita Jala Yamuna Nirvishabhavat Anugrahat Bhagavata Krida Manusha Rupina. Kaliya worshipped the Lord of the universe by offering him fine garments along with necklaces, jewels, and other valuable ornaments, wonderful scents and ointments, and a large garland of lotus flowers. Having thus pleased the Lord, whose flag is marked with the emblem of Garuda, Kaliya felt satisfied. Receiving the Lord's permission to leave, Kaliya circumambulated him and offered him obeisances. Then, taking his wives, friends, and children, he went to the island in the sea. The very moment Kaliya left, the Yamuna was immediately restored to her original condition, free from poison, full of nectarian water. This happened by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was manifesting a human-like form to enjoy his pastimes. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has commented extensively on this verse to explain the word Mani. Kali worshipped the Lord with jewels. Kali worshipped the Lord with jewels. Mani with jewels. The Acharya has quoted from the Sri Radha Krishna Ganadesh Deepika by Rupa Goswami as follows: Kaustubhakyo maniryena pravishya hradam auragam Kaliya preyashi vrinda haster atmopaharita. The Lord has made his Kaustuba gem enter the serpent's lake, and then he arranged for it to be presented to himself by the hands of Kaliya's wife. In other words, because Lord Krishna wanted to act just like an ordinary human being, he made the transcendental Kaustuba gem invisible and caused it to enter within Kaliya's treasury. Then when the appropriate moment came for Kaliya to worship the Lord with many different jewels and ornaments, the serpent's wives, unaware of the Lord's transcendental trick, presented him with the Kaustuba gem. Thinking it was simply one of the jewels in their possession. The Acharya has further commented that the reason Lord Krishna is described in this verse as Garuda Dvaja, he whose flag is marked by the symbol of his carrier Garuda, is that Kaliya is also desired to become Lord Krishna's carrier. Garuda and the serpents are originally related as brothers, and therefore Kaliya wanted to indicate to Lord Krishna, if you have ever to go to a distant place, you should also think of me as your personal carrier. I am the servant of your servants, and in the wink of an eye I can travel hundreds of millions of yojanas. Thus the Puranas write that in the course of Lord Krishna's eternal cycle of pastimes, when Kamsa ordered the Lord to come to Mathura, he sometimes goes there mounted upon Kaliya. Thus end the purpose of the humble servants of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, to the 10th canto, 16th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Krishna Chastises the Serpent Kaliya. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Jai.